Hello there and welcome to this course. This first module is a general introduction. I will tell you a few things about me and my background, and then I will explain to you the rationale and the aim for this course. I suppose that since you're watching this, you already know something about me. Still, let me spend a minute or two telling you who I am and what brings me to talking to you here. My name's Calvi-Parisetti. My origins are Italian, but my soul is British, Scottish in particular. I must apologise in advance for my Glaswegian Italian accent. I hope you will not find this too distracting. I'm a medical doctor, originally specialising in public health and disaster management. For many years, I worked for the International Red Cross and for the United Nations, managing large-scale humanitarian assistance programs, both in the field and from headquarters. Then, at the end of year 2000, I moved to a late academic career. For 12 years, I taught public health and disaster management to graduate and PhD students at 3 major universities. What I'll be talking about in this course, however, has nothing to do with disaster relief or humanitarian assistance. It has very much to do, however, with the same basic motivation I've had for all my life, to be of help to people in need. For many years now, I've been studying and researching the transition we call death. At the beginning, I have taken a scholarly approach. I have read thousands of pages of scientific literature, and I became a member of the Society for Psychical Research and the International Association for Near-Death Studies, 2 professional scientific research organizations. In 2008, I decided to write my own book called 21 Days into the Afterlife. I compiled and systematically presented the evidence I had come across, just as I would do in my university classroom. This was to become a bit of a worldwide success, drawing very positive reviews and being translated into several languages. As a man of science, I'm now convinced that based on the evidence, a rational person can believe in an afterlife. Human personality, in a way which we do not yet understand, indeed appears to survive physical death. This entire course is dedicated to help you reach the same rational belief, so I won't say any more on this. However, let me just reinforce this message by showing you a few quotes. You will see that this rational belief of mine is shared by a number of fellow academics who have taken the time to consider the evidence and have reached the same conclusions. Now, over the years, as this scientific interest of mine grew bigger and bigger, so did the desire to use the knowledge I had accumulated to be of direct help to those who have experienced a loss and those who are dying. I therefore trained as a cognitive behaviour psychotherapist and as a grief counsellor. As I was studying the literature on bereavement, however, I learned that traditional counselling and psychotherapy are of very little help and in certain cases may even make things worse. I studied new approaches to counselling, such as the grief recovery method, which appear a lot more promising. But, especially important, I learned from medical research that the mere fact of considering the evidence for an afterlife can make people feel substantially better. The more time people invest in learning, the greater the psychological benefits. In particular, I was fascinated by the research of Dr. Kenneth Ring in the United States. You will have probably heard about what we call near-death experiences, the thousands upon thousands of cases all around the world in which people who have had a cardiac arrest and are declared clinically and legally dead for 5, 10 or 20 minutes are later resuscitated and report a very complex and strikingly similar conscious experience. It is a well-known fact that all those who have had a near-death experience show dramatic and permanent psychological and behavioural changes. They feel greater sense of purpose, greater self-acceptance, loss of interest for material achievements and rather a tremendous thirst for knowledge for its own sake. Most importantly, the NDE literally demolishes the fear of death, completely and forever. While one retains the normal fears associated with the process of dying, the moment of death itself is regarded positively as a liberating transition into a sublime state that NDEers know they have already briefly encountered. Dr. Ring and his colleagues showed that some of these psychological and behavioural changes show up in people who have only read about near-death experiences and dedicated some time to their study. As I said, the more time was invested in learning about these experiences, the greater the changes. And not only that, further analysis revealed that these shifts in values and outlook did not fade with the passage of time. In some cases, these persons were describing changes that had already lasted 2 decades. In a nutshell then, this is the aim of this course. If learning about just near-death experiences, or NDEs as we call them, can have such dramatic effects, learning that there is evidence from another dozen fields of investigations, and this evidence is completely consistent with what emerges from NDE research, the effects can even be stronger. And here I am now, talking to you personally in the introductory part of this course. You may have recently understood that you're going to die. We're all going to die at some point, but you may have been told that you're going to die sooner than you expected, sooner than you wanted, sooner than you thought you would deserve. If this is your situation, or if, for whatever reason, you're frightened, anguished about dying, this program is for you. Or perhaps you have been touched by the death of a loved one. It doesn't matter whether this was a recent episode or it happened years ago. In my studies on bereavement, I learned that grief ages very well. In many cases, the pain of a loss remains intact over time, either 10 or 20 years. If you are feeling that pain, this program is for you. Contrary to what I did in my book, in which I progressively built my case in a series of chapters and drew conclusions at the end, here I will tell you what's important right away and build back from it at a later stage. So be prepared to hear something that you may find surprising or even shocking. I will speak to you imagining that you yourself are facing an untimely death. Obviously, what I will say about death applies to anybody, to a loved one who may be expected to die soon, or someone who's already passed away. Please listen to this with an open mind and an open heart. Suspend your judgment for just a second and listen carefully to what I have to say. Your mind, your personality, your consciousness, your memories, all that you identify with yourself, with your feeling of being alive, is not dependent on your functioning physical brain. When your brain will die, all this will continue to exist. It will still be you, and it will feel exactly like you, only without a physical body. You have gone through this transition from the physical to the spiritual world many times already, as this is not likely to be your first incarnation. After the demise of your physical body, you will spend a certain amount of time in the various levels of the spirit world, and then you will probably, but not necessarily, incarnate again. In the long term, all this pans out as a project for your own evolution and development. Life in the material and the spiritual worlds has a meaning and a purpose. This, expressed as simply as I can, is the truth. The unbelievable truth, as somebody much more important than me has called it. Let me stress again that I did not come to realize this through some sort of spiritual revelation, nor through a religious conversion. As I said, I'm a man of science, and I came to this conclusion after years of study and research. I maintain that this is the truth not as an act of faith, but because I have considered the scientific and empirical evidence that supports it. I do not believe in this, just as I do not believe in the laws of mechanics. Both the unbelievable truth, as I call it, and the laws of mechanics explain how the world works, based on the available evidence. Now, the evidence. By evidence I mean, and I quote the Webster's definition, the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. You may think that the evidence in support of this truth is scant, a few bits here and there, or fuzzy, confused, difficult to understand. You may think it's arcane, mysterious, inaccessible. Nothing could be further from the truth. The evidence I'm talking about is colossal in quantity and extraordinary in quality. It is readily accessible by anybody who will bother to look for it. It comes from at least a dozen different fields of investigation, all producing coherent and consistent data. It is not a novelty. It does not come from religious sects, New Age gurus, pop psychologists, or some sort of greedy fraudsters. Rather, it has been collected for almost 200 years by some of the brightest scientific minds on the planet, including a few Nobel Prize winners, and studied by the most careful investigators. Before we go any further, let me state again the essence of what I call the unbelievable truth. Your mind, your personality, your consciousness, your memories, all that you identify with yourself, with your feeling of being alive, is not going to end with the end of your physical body. When your body will die, all this will continue to exist. It will still be you, and it will feel exactly like you, only without a physical body. And, let me add, without all the pain and suffering you may be experiencing now. If this sounds too good to be true, that is not my fault. This is it. This is the truth as far as I've been able to understand it through reading, studying, researching and reflecting upon what I've learned. And I'm pretty sure that if you will read, study and reflect, like anybody who's taken the time to consider the evidence, you yourself will come to the same compelling conclusions. Now, if you're a dying person, this understanding will not turn your current dramatic situation into a day at the beach. And if you're suffering from bereavement, this knowledge will not magically dissolve your pain. There is a part of the suffering connected with the process of dying and with grieving a loss, which is quite simply unavoidable. However, I have learned that there's another, quite substantial part of such suffering that can be avoided. A good part of your anguish, your fear, your desperation at the prospect of death is in fact unjustified? I'm talking about the fear of the unknown, the fear of annihilation, of disappearing into oblivion, of ceasing to exist, and for some, the fear of judgment and what may come afterwards. If you consider the evidence, you will understand that all these fears have no basis, no justification, and that ultimate pain deriving from thinking that a loved one simply is no more is also unjustified and can be avoided. And the more evidence you will consider, the more you will reflect on what you're learning, the more you will understand that this is in fact the truth, the less you will feel hopeless and lost. Incidentally, if you're facing death, let me also tell you that being prepared, knowing exactly what awaits you, is a guarantee to avoid that temporary disorientation and confusion that some experience immediately after having made the transition we call death. So this is what I'm asking you. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm not asking you to believe a prophet or a saint, a holy book or a guru. In fact, I'm not asking you to believe anything. I'm not asking you to engage in any exotic practice or special discipline. I'm just asking you to listen and to reflect. I'm asking you to learn, to consider the evidence, and then to make a judgment for yourself. Please read together with me the following message, as it is very important. Your illness, your fear, or the pain of a loss may have taken away many things, but not your intelligence, your capacity to think. Treasure it, make the most of it. Only if you will learn and make your own judgment on what you have learned, you will be able to realize the truth, to lessen the fear, and to prepare for a peaceful, successful transition. Or, if you're suffering from a loss, it is this very rational process that will substantially and permanently reduce the pain. Now, before we finish, let me bring in a very distinguished guest. In the course of this program, you will hear a lot of me talking. However, I will also bring in testimonies from other researchers and scholars to support and further expand on what I have said. This will mostly come in the form of short videos. Today, unfortunately, I only have an audio recording, but it's important because it's from one of the two persons whom I really consider as my masters and mentors. With one, Dr. Raymond Moody, I had the incredible chance of training personally. The other one, the one you will be hearing just now, is David Fontana, who sadly passed away quite prematurely in 2011. David Fontana was a Fellow of the British Psychological Society, a Distinguished Visiting Fellow at Cardiff University, a Professor of Transpersonal Psychology at Liverpool John Moores University, Visiting Professor at the University of Algarve, and a past President of the Society for Psychical Research. I have lifted a few snippets from what was to be his last keynote address at the yearly conference of the British Psychological Society, the year before he died. Please listen to this incredibly learned man who had been studying the subject for over 30 years.
Their idea was you should make friends with your death. It's going to come one day. Get to know more about it. In the West now, we hide away from the reality of death. Because of that, of course, we don't learn about it, we don't understand it, and we're terribly, terribly afraid of it. But the more that you're able to befriend it and understand it, the less you're likely to fear it. So, again, there are these things that prove beyond any reasonable doubt we have these psychic abilities. Yes. Very, very excited. I mean, this was an incredible result because it was under very, very carefully controlled conditions. In other words, I was controlling, and there was no question at all about the genuineness of nature of these things. So there is no question of the reality of psychic phenomena, and in my view, there is no question of communication with those who departed. After all, we are mysteries to ourselves. We know we live, we know we die, And there is this old shamanic saying that one should make friends with one's death, because we go through life terrified and frightened and imagining death as annihilation. Then the problem is, of course, you are always terrified of when it's likely to happen. And of course, it can happen suddenly. In the Middle Ages, they always prayed against sudden death, because that leads to all sorts of confusions in the immediate next life. They prayed for a gentle, tranquil death, for opportunities to prepare and so on, and to die in the right state of mind. The Buddhists take very much the same view. You must die in the right state of mind. The body appears to go into the next world together with our thoughts, our feelings, emotions, very much the person that we are now. So what happens is that the person says, I've died and I have no fear of death. On the follow-up study, something like 85% or 82% I think, of those who had these experiences have lost all fear of death. And even 10, 20 years later will say the same thing. It's changed their lives. So the near-death experience suggests we go, ultimately anyway, to paradise conditions, these beautiful conditions and so on. No, not quite. Not quite. Would that it were that way. But no, it is not. It seems that you are given a glimpse of this higher state. But there's an awful lot more, actually, after death, that you have to go through before you reach that state. Or in some traditions, you come back to this life before you actually reach that state. Or you see things in a different way. You see this life in a different way. Instead of a short period between the cradle and the grave, you see it as part of a tremendous eternal journey. This is an interlude. This is an episode. This is an installment of that long journey.